The prison smelled of rot and rain and broken things. Stone walls wept with cold moisture. A single candle guttered on the floor, throwing long shadows across iron bars and filthy straw. Outside, a storm had swallowed Northumberland whole, thunder rolling across the moors like a judgment no one had asked for, rain hammering the small barred window so hard it sounded like accusation. Samuel Hart sat in the corner of his cell, with his wrists in chains and his head bowed so low it nearly touched his knees. He had the look of a man who had already decided his own verdict. His face was bruised, one eye swollen, nearly shut, his lips split from the villagers who had dragged him through the mud 3 days ago, screaming the word murderer like it was something they had always wanted to call him. His shirt was torn. His hands, those broad, weathered hands that had worked this land since he was 14 years old, were still. He did not move when the cell door opened. He did not look up when the footsteps stopped in front of him. He already knew. There was only one person in all of Northumberland who would come. Samuel. Her voice was quiet, composed. The voice of a woman who had learned very young that the world watched her constantly and would use any crack it found. He still did not look up. "I deserve this," he said. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything except truth. "I lied to you. I used you. I manipulated every feeling you had, and I let you believe something that was never. I am a monster, Your Grace. You should not be here." Silence. Only the rain. Only the candle bending sideways in a draught. Then her voice again, low and careful. "Did you kill her?" He looked up. And for a moment, just a moment, the careful composure on Alicia Watson's face cracked open, just slightly, just enough. Her cloak was soaked through. Her hair was escaping its pins. She was standing in a prison cell in the middle of a storm, and she looked like the most composed, most heartbreaking, most terrifyingly beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. He looked at her and felt the full, crushing weight of everything he had destroyed. "No," he said. "I did not." He held her gaze. "But I do not expect you to believe me." The rain screamed against the window. The candle nearly died. Alicia Watson, Duchess of Alnwick, the wealthiest woman in Northumberland, the woman he had lied to and used and broken and, God help him, fallen in love with somewhere in the wreckage of his own scheming, stepped forward. She reached through the iron bars. She took his shackled hands in hers. His whole body went still. "I believe you," she said. He stared at her, his lips parted. No words came. "Not because I forgive you," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, her thumb tracing slowly across his bruised knuckles. "Not because you deserve it." Her eyes held his, steady, devastating. "Because I know what guilt looks like, and you are not guilty of murder." His hand was trembling beneath her touch. He could feel it and could not stop it. She leaned slightly closer. Her voice fell to something quiet and sharp and promising, the voice of a woman who had decided something dangerous and intended to see it through. "You are guilty of breaking my heart. That is a different crime entirely." She released his hands, stepped back, smoothed her cloak as though she had simply called on a neighbour. "And I will decide your punishment for that later." She turned. She walked toward the door. The guard stepped aside without a word, because she was the Duchess of Alnwick, and the world had always stepped aside for her. Samuel watched her go. His chains clinked softly as his hands curled around the iron bar between them. And for the first time in 3 days, something moved through his chest that was not despair. It felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. 6 months earlier, the morning Alicia Watson's horse threw a shoe, she was riding hard and alone across the northeast edge of her estate, which was the only time she ever felt like herself. Not the Duchess, not the Ice Duchess, which was what they called her in the village and in the drawing rooms of Newcastle, and probably in London too, though she had not been to London in 3 years. Not the widow, not the cautionary tale about marrying too young and too quickly, and for the wrong reasons. Just a woman, moving fast, with the moors opening up around her, and the wind pulling her hair loose, and the grey Northumberland sky pressing down on everything like a beautiful, indifferent hand. Then her mare stumbled, and she pulled up, and the animal stood favouring her front left leg, and Alicia crouched in the mud and found the missing shoe, and looked up and realised she was standing at the edge of a field that was not hers. The field was immaculate. That was the first thing she noticed. Every row was perfectly turned. The stone wall at the edge was recently repaired. each rock fitted with the kind of care that spoke of a man who took his work personally. The gate was oiled. The drainage ditch was cleared. Everything about this farm spoke of a man who worked as though the land itself could feel whether he was paying attention. She heard him before she saw him. That mare's favouring her left foreleg. The voice came from behind her, low, unhurried, with the Northumberland flatness that she had grown up hearing from tenant farmers all her life. She straightened, turned. Samuel Hart was standing at the gate with a bucket in one hand, watching her without apology or deference. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she'd expected, with the kind of physical presence that came not from size alone, but from absolute self-possession. His face was weathered and serious, the face of a man who had spent decades reading weather and soil and the moods of difficult things. He was not looking at her title. He was looking at her horse. "I can see that," she said. "Thrown a shoe," he said, moving past her without asking permission and crouching beside the mare, running his hand down the animal's leg with a practiced, confident touch. The mare, who was not generally a cooperative animal, stood perfectly still. Alicia watched him. "Yes," she said. "I noticed. Nearest farrier is 6 miles south." He stood, patted the mare's neck once. "She'll not make it without rest and water first. I am aware of equine anatomy." "Mr. Hart," he said. "Samuel Hart." He said it without a flinch, without the slight downward shift of the eyes that most people produced when speaking their name to her. He said it the way a man stated a fact, complete, unbothered, requiring no apology. Something about it irritated her enormously. Something about it also made her stand very still. "Your Grace," she said. "I know who you are," he said, and turned back toward the farm. "Bring her in. I'll water her. You can send to the farrier from here." He did not wait to see if she would follow. She followed. She waited in the yard while he saw to the horse, sitting on a stone wall with her gloves in her lap and the wind moving through the grass, and she told herself she was simply waiting for the farrier's boy to return. And that was the only reason she had not simply walked the 6 miles herself. Samuel Hart came back with a cup of water, which he handed to her without ceremony. "You do not have to," she began. "It's water," he said, "not a declaration." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. He sat down on the wall a careful distance away, and he looked out over his fields, the way men looked at things they had built with their hands and their years and their losses, and he did not speak, neither did she, which was unusual. Alicia Watson was very good at conversation. She had learned it as a survival skill. The right question, at the right moment, the perfectly modulated response, the smile that communicated warmth without vulnerability. She had not survived 7 years of aristocratic society, a difficult marriage, a very public widowhood, and the relentless affectionate cruelty of Northumberland gossip by being anything less than socially immaculate. But Samuel Hart was not talking, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable, which made it deeply uncomfortable. "Your fields are well kept," she said finally. "Thank you. The drainage work along the north wall is better than anything I've seen on the main estate." He looked at her then. A direct, measuring look. "You notice the drainage work," he said. "I notice everything about my land, Mr. Hart." "My land," he said quietly, without aggression, without any particular emotion she could name. "I farm it. There's a difference." It should have been impertinent. From anyone else in the county it would have been. From him it was simply true. "Yes," she said. "There is." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it, something she might have called recognition. Then it was gone, and he was looking back at his fields, and Alicia Watson found herself in the profoundly unusual position of wanting very much to say something interesting enough to make him look at her again. She did not examine that feeling. She put her gloves back on instead. In the village, they said, the Duchess of Alnwick had no heart. They said her husband had been a kind man, and she had barely mourned him. They said she ran her estate with the cold efficiency of a man and the ambition of someone who had something to prove. They said she had turned away 3 serious suitors in 3 years and showed no inclination toward a second marriage, which was unnatural, which was strange, which confirmed what they had always suspected, that the Ice Duchess was simply not built for warmth. Alicia Watson knew everything they said. She had been hearing versions of it since she was 23 years old, and her husband had brought her north and introduced her to a county that had already decided who she was before she opened her mouth. She did not argue. She did not explain. She simply managed her estate with great efficiency and great precision, and went home to the hall each evening to rooms that were beautifully furnished and entirely empty. She had grown very good at not feeling the emptiness. She had grown very good at many things that were not happiness. The farrier came. Her mar was shod. She should have ridden home. She came back the following Thursday on the pretense of inspecting the eastern drainage. Samuel Hart was repairing a section of stone wall when she arrived. He looked up. He said nothing. He went back to work. She stood watching him for a moment, which she would later insist was simply an assessment of the wall construction, and then she said, "The mortar work on the section you repaired last spring is holding better than I expected." "Dry summer," he said, without stopping. "The section, before it was done by my land agent's men, it's already crumbling. Wet spring, and they rushed it. Could you look at it?" He stopped, turned and looked at her with that same direct measuring quality, the look that evaluated rather than performed. "Is that an order, Your Grace, or a question?" She held his gaze. "A question," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Then yes," he said. "I can look at it." She came back 4 more times in the following 3 weeks. Each time there was a reason. The wall. The drainage. A question about the eastern pasture that she could easily have sent her land agent to address. She knew this. She came anyway. Each time Samuel Hart worked and spoke in that unhurried, unimpressed, completely unaffected way. And each time she rode home, she told herself that it was simply refreshing to speak to someone who did not want something from her. She did not look at his hands. She did not notice the way he moved through his land, as though he and it had an understanding. She did not replay their conversations in the evenings when the hall was quiet. She was the Ice Duchess. She did not do things like that. Then came the afternoon she arrived, and found him arguing with his wife. She heard it before she reached the gate, a woman's voice, sharp and carrying, cutting through the afternoon. 6 months behind on the Northfield fence, and you're standing here talking to the Duchess like she'll save you. She won't save you. She'll replace you when she finds someone who can actually pay what he owes. Alicia stopped her horse. She should have turned around. She had enough sensitivity to know that. She had walked into a private moment, and the correct response was to retreat quietly and send the land agent next time. She did not retreat. She sat very still on her horse, and she watched Samuel Hart stand in his yard while his wife's voice stripped him open. And she watched him take it with the same self-possessed stillness he brought to everything. Not flinching, not surrendering, but absorbing it with the particular exhaustion of a man who had absorbed it many times before. Then Martha Hart saw the Duchess watching from beyond the gate. The woman's eyes moved from Alicia to her husband and back again, and something passed through her expression. Calculation, cold and quick. Before she pulled her face back into blankness and went inside without another word, Samuel turned. He saw Alicia. He did not look embarrassed. He looked, for one unguarded moment, simply tired. "Your Grace," he said. "I can come another time," she said. "No." He crossed to the gate. "The fence is ready. I'll show you." They walked the northern boundary in silence for a long time, and the silence was different now. Heavier, freighted with something that had not been there before. Finally, without looking at her, he said, "She is not wrong. I am behind." "The fence is excellent work," Alicia said. "I will note it in the ledger as partial settlement." He stopped walking. "That is not. It is an accounting decision, Mr. Hart. The work has value. I am recording it accordingly." She looked at him. "Do not make it into something it isn't." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Why do you keep coming here?" he asked. The question landed without warning, direct and unadorned, the way he did everything. Alicia felt something move through her chest, a warmth she had no intention of naming, no room for, no business feeling, and she looked away across his fields and said, "The drainage work. I told you. The drainage work was finished 3 weeks ago." Silence. "The northern pasture, then?" "The northern pasture is your land agent's jurisdiction." She did not answer. She walked back to her horse and rode home, and that evening she sat at her writing desk for a very long time without writing anything. There are stories that move through you quietly, like water finding the low places in stone. slow and patient and inevitable. Stories about women who have learned to need nothing and men who have forgotten they are capable of tenderness. Stories about the terrible danger of being truly seen by someone you have no right to want. If you have found your way to Hidden Desire Chronicles, then you already know the feeling, that restless, aching pull of a story that will not let you go. Stay with us, subscribe, so that the next story finds you before it finds anyone else. Turn on your notifications, because these are not the kinds of stories that wait. And tell me this, while Samuel Hart is still standing at that gate and Alicia Watson is still pretending she came for the drainage work, do you think she should have turned back that first day? Or do you believe that some things are already decided before we choose them? Leave your thoughts below. The story is only just beginning. Samuel Hart had never thought of himself as a man who lied. He had worked hard. He had married badly, young and hopeful and wrong, in the way of men who confuse intensity for love. He had farmed this land for 11 years through drought and flood, and the particular grinding poverty that came from owing rent on soil, that gave back exactly as much as it received, and never anything more. He had raised 2 children in a house where the warmth came primarily from the hearth and not from any other source. He had not lied. It was one of the things he had kept. Until Martha. He came home from the Duchess's estate on a Thursday evening in October to find Martha sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hand, and an expression on her face that he recognised, the expression that preceded every negotiation that had ever gone against him. "She likes you," Martha said. He poured water into the basin and washed his hands. "She is my landlord. She comes every week. She comes to inspect the land. Samuel." Martha's voice was flat and final. "She comes because of you. Any fool can see it." He dried his hands, did not turn around. "What are you saying, Martha?" She set the letter down. He could hear the careful, measured quality of her breathing, the sound of a woman assembling an argument she had been constructing for some time. "I am saying that we are 4 months behind on the rent. I am saying that the north barn roof will not survive another winter. I am saying that Eliza needs new boots and Thomas needs a winter coat and we are out of options." He turned then, looked at her. And you could fix all of it," she said, "if you were willing." The silence in the kitchen was very loud. "What you are suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing," she said, and her eyes were flat and practical and completely, without warmth, the eyes of a woman who had decided that love was a luxury they could no longer afford. "I am simply observing that a wealthy widow is paying an unusual amount of attention to my husband, and that a clever man might understand what that attention is worth." Samuel looked at his wife for a long moment. He thought about the drainage work, about a cup of water handed without ceremony, about the way Alicia Watson had said a question, not an order, and what her face had looked like when she said it. "No," he said. "Samuel, no." He went to bed. Martha did not follow for a very long time. He held out for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of bills and cold, and Eliza crying over boots that had split at the sole, and Thomas's cough that wouldn't clear. And the north barn roof beginning to bow in a way that meant spring repairs would cost twice what they cost now. 3 weeks of Alicia Watson not coming, because he had stopped going to the boundary wall, and the pasture and anywhere he might encounter her, and the absence of her felt, he would not think about how it felt. 3 weeks before he went to the eastern boundary on a Tuesday afternoon, when he knew she rode that direction, he told himself he was checking the fence. He was not checking the fence. She came over the rise at 2:30, and when she saw him, she slowed her horse, but did not stop. And she looked at him with that measured, careful expression that told him absolutely nothing and everything. "Mr. Hart, Your Grace, I had not expected to see you. I was checking the eastern fence." Her eyes moved to the fence, which was manifestly fine, and back to his face. "Of course," she said. She should have ridden on. He should have let her. "There is a section further north that may need attention before winter," he said. "If you have time." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "I have time," she said. He had told himself he was doing it for the roof, and the rent, and Eliza's boots. He told himself that for approximately 2 weeks. Then he stopped lying to himself because Samuel Hart had never been a man who lied. And the truth, the terrible, inconvenient, devastating truth, was that he came to the eastern fence on Tuesday afternoons because Alicia Watson was the only person in his life who spoke to him like he was worth speaking to. She was brilliant. He had not expected that. He had expected a titled woman who had inherited land and spent her days in drawing rooms. Instead, she knew her estate better than her own land agent. She had opinions about crop rotation that were sharper than any farmer he had met. She asked questions that were actually questions, not performances of interest, and she listened to the answers with her whole attention. She laughed sometimes. Not the polished social laugh he had heard her produce for visitors, but a real one, unguarded and quick. Usually when he said something dry and completely deadpan about the land agent's drainage theories. He told himself he was not watching for it. He watched for it every single week. Martha, meanwhile, watched everything from a distance and said nothing, and waited with the patience of a woman who had learned that hunger could be managed if you simply kept your eye on the eventual meal. November came in hard and cold, and the Tuesday, when Alicia arrived at the eastern boundary, she found him repairing a section of wall, alone in the rain. She dismounted without being asked. She held stones while he placed them. She did not complain about the rain or the mud or the cold. She worked beside him in silence for a long time, and the rain came harder, and neither of them suggested stopping. "You should go home," he said finally. "Your Grace." "Probably," she agreed. She handed him another stone. He placed it. She watched his hands. "My husband," she said quietly, not looking at him, "was a good man. I want to be clear about that. He was kind and he was decent, and he never once raised his voice to me." Samuel said nothing. He understood this was not a conversation he was being invited into yet. "But I spent 7 years in a house with a man who looked through me," she continued. "Not unkindly. He simply looked through me, as though I were made of glass. As though I were a very pleasant and decorative kind of glass." She stopped. "You do not look through me," she said. "It is the strangest thing." The rain hammered the moors around them. Samuel's hands went still on the wall. He should have said something gentle and deflecting. He should have said something that preserved distance and continued the careful fiction that these Tuesday afternoons were about the land. What he said was, "No, I don't." She looked up at him. The rain was running down her face. She had never looked less like a duchess in her life. She had never looked more like herself. Something happened in Samuel Hart's chest that he had been trying to prevent for 2 months. He looked away. "You should get inside," he said, "before you take ill." She held his gaze for one more moment, long, complicated, devastating, and then she put her gloves back on and led her horse towards shelter. And Samuel Hart stood in the rain, with his hands pressed flat against cold stone, and told himself with great urgency that he was doing this for the roof. He was doing it for the roof. He was no longer doing it for the roof. December. They had stopped pretending the meetings were about the land. They met at the old shepherd's cottage at the edge of the estate, where no one came in winter, where the walls were thick and the hearth was small and the world outside could not reach them. Samuel brought wood. Alicia brought nothing except herself, which was considerably more than he had bargained for. They talked for hours, about everything, about nothing, about the things people talk about when they have decided, without either of them saying so, to be honest with each other. He told her about his father's farm, about learning the land the way other children learn prayers, by repetition and reverence, and the understanding that it was larger than you. About marrying Martha at 22 because she was there and he was lonely and he had confused those two things for something more. She told him about coming north, about the hall that had looked beautiful in summer and enormous in winter and empty all year round, about learning to run an estate from men who did not want to teach her, about the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who admired you without seeing you. "They call you the Ice Duchess," he said one evening. The fire was low. They were sitting close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. She didn't. "I know," she said. "It's wrong," he said. She looked at him. "You are not cold," he said. "You are careful. There is a difference." Her lips parted slightly. He looked at the fire. "People who have been hurt tend to be careful," he said quietly. "It is not a character flaw. It is evidence." The silence that followed was the most intimate silence she had ever sat inside. She did not reach for him. He did not reach for her. But something crossed between them in that fire-lit, rain-locked room. that was as real as anything either of them had ever felt. And they both knew it, and neither of them spoke of it. And that restraint was its own kind of devastation. January. Martha had noticed the change in him. She noticed the way he came home from their meetings with his jaw set, and his eyes somewhere she couldn't reach. And she had narrowed her own eyes and said nothing, and recalculated. She had not expected him to develop a conscience in the middle of a scheme. She had especially not expected him to develop feelings. She intercepted him one evening in the kitchen. "You are going to ruin this," she said. "I can see it on your face. You feel guilty. Martha. She is a duchess," she said. "She is not your friend. She is not your. Whatever you have decided she is to you, she is a means to an end, and you will remember that." "I want to stop," he said. The kitchen went very quiet. "No," Martha said. "Martha. We have debts," she said, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "We have children. We have a roof that is one bad storm from collapse, and I will not." She stopped, collected herself. "I will expose what you have done. I will go to her hall, and I will tell her Duchess everything. The plan, all of it, from the beginning, and you will have nothing. Not the farm, not the children, not even your name." Samuel looked at his wife. He saw for the first time with complete clarity that he did not know her at all. "Then, I suppose," he said quietly, "we continue." He left the kitchen. He went to bed. He stared at the ceiling for a very long time. February. He was still meeting Alicia at the cottage. But everything had changed, in the way that everything changes when a man who has decided not to feel something discovers that he has already felt it past the point of return. He sat across from her in the firelight, and he hated himself steadily and completely, and he watched her face when she laughed, and when she was quiet, and when she looked at the fire with that distant private expression that she only allowed herself when she thought no one was watching. And he felt the lies he was carrying like stones in his chest, and he could not put them down, and he could not carry them any further. And he was destroying her, and he knew it, and he kept coming back. Because he could not stop. Because whatever he had told himself this was in the beginning, it was not that anymore. She reached across one evening and tucked a loose strand of hair behind his ear. A small, unconscious gesture, intimate and unguarded. And then she realized what she had done and started to pull back. And he caught her hand. He held it. Just that. Just her hand in the firelight, in the silence. Neither of them breathed. "Samuel," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "This is—" "I know." He released her hand. She did not move it away. They sat in the firelight with her hand resting in his, and the fire burned lower, and outside the Northumberland winter pressed against the walls, and Samuel Hart felt the most exquisite, most unbearable combination of joy and self-hatred he had ever experienced in his life. You are exactly where this story wants you, right here, in this firelit room. And with his hand over hers, and everything still unspoken, and the world outside not yet arrived, this is the moment, isn't it? The moment before the fall. When something beautiful is still intact, when you want to reach through the story and say stop, don't move, stay exactly here. But you already know stories don't work that way. If Hidden Desire Chronicles is the kind of storytelling you have been looking for, slow burning, emotionally devastating, the kind that stays with you long after the final word, then subscribe now. Turn on your notifications. Because the next story is already waiting, and it will find you when you least expect it. And while you are here, while Samuel still has her hand, and the truth is still locked inside him, could you forgive a man who lied to you from the beginning? If you knew, beyond doubt, that what he felt in the end was real, tell me below. I want to know what you believe about love and what it can survive. March arrived wet and punishing. It was Martha who broke first, though not in the way Samuel had feared. He came home late on a Thursday, later than usual, and found the cottage dark except for a lamp burning in the bedroom. He assumed Martha was asleep. He built the fire, sat in the kitchen, and tried, as he did every night now, to think of a way out of a trap he had built himself. He was sitting there when he heard the sound. He told himself afterward that some part of him had known before he stood up. Some animal instinct, the kind developed by years of watching the land for subtle signs of trouble, had already assembled the evidence. The unfamiliar horse in the yard, the lamp burning at an odd angle, the quality of the silence in the cottage.
He opened the bedroom door.
Martha looked at him without flinching. The man beside her scrambled for the sheet. Samuel recognized him. Silas Crane, who drove the milk cart, who had a reputation and a loud laugh and a way of looking at women that Samuel had never liked. The three of them remained in an awful tableau for a long moment. Then Martha said, "Close the door, Samuel." He did. He went back to the kitchen. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table and stared at them until they stopped shaking. After a while, he heard Silas Crane's horse leave the yard. Martha came to the kitchen doorway. She was dressed. Her expression was careful but not afraid. "How long?" Samuel said. "That is not the relevant question." "How long, Martha?" A pause. 2 years, she said. Something in Samuel's chest turned over and went still. "The money," he said slowly. "The money from the Duchess, the extra money." Martha said nothing. "You used it," he said. "For him." "I used it to live," she said flatly, "which is what I have been trying to do since the day I married you." He looked at her. He looked at her for a very long time. This woman he had married at 22. This woman he had tried and failed and tried again. This woman who had turned him into a liar and a cheat and a man he did not recognize. He felt, suddenly and with great clarity, nothing but exhausted. "I am going to end it," he said, "with the Duchess, all of it. I am going to tell her the truth." "You will destroy yourself." "Yes," he said, "probably." "And the children?" He flinched. Martha saw it. She always saw it. "Think about what you are doing," she said quietly. "Before you do it." She went to bed. Samuel sat in the kitchen until dawn. He went to Alicia. He could not do anything else. He had run out of everything. Justifications, strategies, the particular moral numbness that had gotten him this far. He was empty of everything except the truth. And the truth was that the woman sitting across from him in the shepherd's cottage deserved to hear it from him before she heard it from anyone else. He arrived at the cottage in the late afternoon. The sky was the colour of a bruise. Rain was coming. She was already there, sitting by the unlit hearth, and when she looked up at him, her face did the thing it always did. Opened slightly, the way it only did for him. The careful composure giving way to something real. And it nearly destroyed him before he said a word. "Samuel," she said. "What's wrong?" He stood in the doorway. He opened his mouth. He had planned what he would say. He had rehearsed it walking across the fields. Clear, honest, taking full responsibility, giving her the entire truth without mitigation or self-pity. He would tell her about Martha's plan, about his own agreement, about the debts and the roof and the terrible arithmetic of desperation. He would not ask her to understand. He would not ask for anything except the chance to say it. He looked at her face. He kissed her instead. It was not the kiss of a man executing a plan. It was not the careful, controlled proximity of the past 3 months. It was the kiss of a man who has run out of time and knows it, desperate and devastating and entirely honest in the way that words had failed to be. She made a small sound of surprise, and then she kissed him back, and, for one moment, one terrible, perfect, unforgivable moment, it was everything it should have been, had he been a different man in a different life. Then the cottage door opened. Martha stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, her face white with rain and something else, something cold and crystalline and final. She took in the scene before her with one long look, and then she turned to Alicia Watson, and she told her everything. The words fell like stones dropped into still water, each one sending out rings that touched every part of what had existed between them. The plan, the debt, the scheme. The meetings that were not meetings, but performances. The feelings he had not been supposed to develop. All of it laid out in Martha's flat, precise, remorseless voice, while the rain hammered the cottage roof and Alicia Watson stood completely still. Samuel did not speak. What could he have said? Every word was true. He watched Alicia's face. He watched the warmth leave it. He watched the Ice Duchess come back, not returning so much being retrieved, called back to the surface by necessity, by the particular kind of pain that teaches people why they learn to be careful in the first place. Her eyes found his. He could not hold them. "Alicia," he started. "Do not," she said. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. The voice of a woman using every tool she had not to break in front of people who did not deserve to witness it. She walked to the door. Samuel stepped toward her. "I said do not." She left. Then Martha and Samuel were alone in the cottage, and the careful destruction of everything blew apart at once. He turned on her about Silas Crane She turned on him about the Duchess, voices rising until the cottage seemed too small to contain them, until the words became things that could not be unsaid. Martha went home first. He followed an hour later. That night they lay in the same bed like stones, not touching, not speaking. In the morning, Martha did not wake. The village was very efficient about deciding what had happened. By the time the constable arrived, the story was already complete. A marital fight witnessed by 3 neighbours, a woman dead in her bed, a husband with a history of desperate poverty, and a rumoured involvement with the Duchess. The evidence, as the village assembled it, was sufficient. The arrest was made before midday. Samuel did not resist. He walked with the constable through the village with his hands quiet at his sides and the stairs following him like weather, and he thought about Eliza and Thomas being taken to the neighbours, and he thought about a shepherd's cottage in the rain, and he thought about a woman's face going cold, and he said nothing. The prison was everything prisons were, cold and dark and smelling of human despair. He sat in the corner of his cell, and he constructed, in his mind, a complete and thorough accounting of every wrong choice that had brought him here. And when he reached the end of it, he found he had no argument against any of them. He had earned this. Not the murder. He had not murdered Martha. But he had earned the loss. He had earned the wreckage. He had earned the look on Alicia Watson's face in the cottage doorway. He sat in his cell and waited for whatever came next. Alicia Watson went home to her hall the night of Martha's death, and sat in the library for a very long time. She did not weep. That was the particular thing about grief that had a complex centre. It took time to find its shape. First, there was only a great numb stillness, like the world after a storm has moved through and taken everything. She sat in the stillness and she went through what she knew. She was a woman who knew her own mind. She had been underestimated for long enough that she had learned to rely on that fact as an advantage. And she knew, somewhere below the humiliation and the pain and the profound twisting anger that she was only beginning to feel the edges of, she knew that Samuel Hart had not murdered his wife. She knew what guilt looked like. She had sat across from him in firelit rooms for 4 months. She knew the precise geography of his face, every quiet tell, the way his jaw set when he was holding something back, and the way his eyes went when he was genuinely afraid. He had not killed Martha. She was also furious enough to have let him rot in that cell for a considerable time. She was a complicated woman. She went to the prison. She gathered evidence the way she ran her estate, methodically, personally, refusing to delegate what mattered. She went to the cottage herself in the early morning, before the constable's men returned, and she walked the ground with the careful attention she gave everything, and she found the boot prints. Heavy, wide, not Samuel's. She knew his boots, had seen the prints of them often enough in wet earth along the fence line. She found the widow Pierce, who lived along the mill road, who had seen a man on horseback passing toward the Hart cottage late on the night Martha died. The widow Pierce had not come forward because no one had asked her, and because she was 70 years old, and had learned that women of 70 who lived alone were wise to mind their business. Alicia sat with her for an hour and asked the right questions. She found the letter in the cottage tucked inside a Bible that no one had thought to open, in Martha Hart's handwriting. A letter to Silas Crane, 2 weeks old. "You will leave this county, or I will tell Samuel everything and take the children. And I promise you, Silas, that I will burn every bridge you have in this county before I am done." Martha had threatened him. Silas Crane had decided to remove the threat. He had come to the cottage that night, knowing Samuel was home late, knowing Martha would be alone in the hour before sleep. He had staged it carefully, a scene that told the story of a marital fight, that used the convenient history of a husband with motive and an audience of 3 neighbours who had heard arguing and were prepared to remember it in whatever configuration suited the story they had already decided was true. It was not a complex plan. It was the plan of a frightened man in a hurry. Alicia took her evidence to the magistrate on a Tuesday morning. She presented it without drama, without performance, with the ice-cold precision of a woman who had spent 3 years being underestimated by men who wielded authority they had not earned, and who had decided that today was not the day to allow that to continue. Silas Crane was arrested by Thursday. Samuel's trial was set for the following week. The courtroom was full. All of Northumberland, it seemed, had decided to witness whatever was going to happen. Samuel sat at the front with his wrists free of chains now, but his face still carrying the bruises, still carrying that quality of a man who had decided to accept what was coming. He had not seen Alicia since the prison. He heard her before he saw her. The shift in the room's atmosphere, the particular quality of attention that followed her, everywhere, the sound of a woman entering a space and rearranging its centre of gravity simply by existing in it. He did not turn around. The case was presented. The evidence was presented. The prosecutor laid out his theory of a marital conflict, a history of poverty and desperation, the testimony of neighbours who had heard a fight. Then Alicia Watson stood. She did not take the stand as a woman advocating for a man she had cared for. She took it as the Duchess of Alnwick, straight-spined, measured, devastating, and she presented what she had found with the methodical clarity of someone who had spent 3 years learning that truth required a more powerful advocate than feeling. She presented the boot prints, the witness, the letter. She presented Silas Crane's history with Martha Hart and the timeline of his movements on the night she died. She did not look at Samuel while she spoke. When she finished, the room was very quiet. The magistrate looked at Silas Crane, who had gone the colour of old ash. "Remove Mr. Crane," the magistrate said. Samuel Hart was released at 2:30 in the afternoon. He walked out of the courthouse into thin winter sunlight, and he stood on the steps for a moment with the cold air on his face. And he looked at the world, the ordinary, continuing, astonishing world, with the expression of a man who had not expected to see it again from this angle. The crowd dispersed around him. His neighbour brought his children, and Eliza ran to him, and he lifted her and held her against his chest for a long time with his eyes shut. Alicia was gone. He did not go to her. He told himself it was because she deserved peace. He told himself it was because there was nothing he could offer her. No argument, no explanation, no possible transaction that balanced what he had taken from her. He told himself that the kindest thing, the only decent thing, was to disappear from her life as completely as he had inserted himself into it. He told himself these things with great conviction while he fixed his roof and brought his children home and broke his northern pasture for spring planting and lay awake each night staring at the dark, feeling her absence like a missing limb. A month passed, then another. The days grew longer, the fields greened. Northumberland opened up from winter with that particular, reluctant, breathtaking beauty that it only permitted once a year. Samuel sat on his porch in the early morning and watched the dawn move across his fields, and he was very tired and very honest with himself about why. He heard her before he saw her. He was getting good at that. This is the moment. Everything has broken. Everything has been revealed. Everything has cost more than anyone wanted to pay. And she's walking across that field. Before we arrive at the ending, before we find out what she says when she reaches him, before we learn whether love can be rebuilt on the rubble of betrayal, before we hear what a man sounds like when he has finally run out of ways to protect himself from hope, stay with Hidden Desire Chronicles. If this story has made you feel something you did not expect to feel, if you have found yourself whispering just one more minute into the quiet of your evening, then subscribe now, so the next story finds you the moment it arrives. Turn on your notifications, leave a comment below, and tell me this: while she is still walking and he is still sitting, and neither of them knows yet what the other is going to say, do you believe some loves are worth the destruction they cause? Or is love that demands this much simply not love at all? I want to know what you think. She came across his field in the early morning with mud on her boots, and no carriage, and no servants, which meant she had walked from wherever she had left her horse, which was at least a quarter mile, which meant she had decided something before she arrived. Samuel stood up slowly. He watched her come. The field was long, and she crossed it without hurrying, without theatre, without any of the performance that her life usually required of her. She was simply a woman walking across a field in the early morning because she had decided she was going to, and that was sufficient. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked at him. He looked at her. The Northumberland morning was very still around them. That particular, held-breath stillness of early spring, when the world is deciding what it is going to be. "You did not come," she said. "No. I waited," she said. "I did not intend to. But I did." He looked down at his hands. "I did not think you would want." "I am here, Samuel." He looked up. She climbed the 2 steps to the porch. She stood in front of him. She reached up and took his face in both her hands, the way she had taken his shackled hands through the prison bars, with that same quiet, devastating certainty, as though she had thought about it for a long time and arrived at a conclusion. "I am angry," she said. "I want you to understand that. I am so angry with you that there are mornings when I cannot see straight." His jaw worked. "Alicia, I am not finished." He was quiet. "I am angry," she said again, "and I have tried very seriously and with considerable effort to stop loving you. I have been unsuccessful." Her thumbs traced his jaw. "I hate that I love you. I want you to know that too. It is deeply inconvenient and entirely your fault, and I resent it enormously." Something broke open in his chest. "Alicia," his voice was not his own. "What I did to you, what I let happen, there is no, she agreed. "There isn't. I cannot explain it in a way that—" "Samuel," she looked at him steadily. "I know what happened. I know when it stopped being a scheme. I know what it was and what it became, and I know what it cost you." A pause. "I know you tried to end it and she would not let you." He stared at her. "I am an investigator," she said very quietly, "when I choose to be." He closed his eyes. Her thumbs traced his cheekbones. "You lied to me," she said. "You did. And that is a real thing. And it will not be dismissed. And it will not disappear. And you will spend a very long time making it right." She leaned slightly closer. "I intend to make that extremely difficult for you." His breath came out of him in a long, broken exhale. "Alicia, I love you," she said. "God help me. I love you, and I am going to make you earn every single day of it. And I need you to understand that going in." He opened his eyes. She was right there, real and complicated and furious, and here on his porch in the early morning, with mud on her boots and her hands on his face, and he had not earned her, not even close, and she was offering him the chance to try. The tear that slipped down his cheek surprised him. He felt her thumb catch it. He kissed her. Not desperately, this time. Not with the panicked energy of a man running out of time. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he finally believes he is allowed to. Carefully, gratefully, with his whole attention. With the deep relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time. She kissed him back. The morning held them. The ton was, as predicted, scandalized. The newspapers were worse. The Duchess of Alnwick and her farmer was the preferred construction, deployed with the particular delight of people who have found something to disapprove of and intend to enjoy the disapproval thoroughly. There were letters. There were whispered withdrawals of invitations. There was a strongly worded visit from Alicia's cousin, who spent 45 minutes explaining the social consequences of her choices, and departed having accomplished nothing at all. Alicia listened to all of it with the perfectly composed expression of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, and had developed a comprehensive immunity to the opinions of people who had never once surprised her. Samuel endured it differently. He was not practiced at being looked through and found wanting by people he had grown up beside. It cost him. She could see that in the set of his jaw in the village, in the way his posture changed when he walked through the market and felt the stares. He was a proud man. Pride was not vanity with him. It was something structural, something he had built himself out of honest work and cold winters, and the refusal to apologize for what he was. She loved him more for the fact that he did not ask her to stop. He walked into her world, into drawing rooms and estate dinners, and the careful social geography of Northumberland, with that same self-possessed quiet he brought to everything. And he endured the condescension without performance, and he did not once ask her to protect him from it. She protected him anyway, not obviously, not in ways that diminished him. But she deployed the full weight of the Duchess of Alnwick, the coldly impeccable reputation, the economic influence, the social precision she had spent 15 years cultivating, with a quiet, systematic thoroughness that left certain particularly vocal opinion holders considerably more uncomfortable than they had intended to be. She never mentioned it to Samuel. He knew anyway. One evening he caught her eye across a dinner table after she had said something so perfectly calibrated that it had effectively ended the social aspirations of a particularly nasty baronet for the remainder of the season. He said nothing. He simply looked at her with that expression that only existed on his face when it was directed at her. Private, certain, the warmth of a man who knows he is seen, and she looked back and they understood each other perfectly. He courted her. That had been her condition, her punishment, as she called it, with that dry precision that he had fallen in love with over a fence line in October. He would court her properly. He would be seen with her. He would stand in daylight, in public, and claim her without apology and without hedging. And he would endure every raised eyebrow and whispered comment and social consequence that came with loving the Duchess of Alnwick in full view of everyone who had decided it was their business. He did it without complaint. He arrived at the hall on Tuesday evenings, not the shepherd's cottage, the hall, through the front door, and left his hat with the butler, who had clearly been given instructions not to show surprise about anything. And he sat in her drawing room, and they drank tea and talked, and sometimes she played the piano while he sat in the chair by the fire and watched her with that quiet, devoted attention that undid her more effectively than any declaration. Sometimes Eliza and Thomas came with him. They were 10 and 8 respectively, practical and curious, and entirely unimpressed by duchesses, which Alicia found delightful. Eliza had strong opinions about horses. Thomas had questions about everything. Alicia answered all of them with complete seriousness, which they seemed to respect. He was not trying to be their mother. She was not pretending that grief was simple, or that children's hearts were not complicated instruments. But she listened to them. She remembered what they told her. She brought Eliza to the stables and let her spend an afternoon with the mare, who had thrown a shoe on the eastern boundary, which was, in its quiet way, the beginning of everything. He asked her on a Tuesday evening in September. He had not planned it, or rather he had planned and discarded the plan so many times that when the moment came it arrived simply and without architecture, the way honest things tend to do. They were sitting in the drawing room in the particular comfortable quiet that had become their version of intimacy. Her reading, him watching the fire, both of them occupying the same silence, with an ease that still sometimes struck him as the most remarkable thing in his life. He said, "Alicia." She looked up from her book. "I am not the obvious choice," he said. "I know that. I know what it will cost you socially, and I know that certain doors will not open the way they might have. And I know that there are people in this county who will spend the rest of their lives having opinions about it." He paused. "I also know I am not the man you should have, based on any conventional calculation." She set her book down. She waited. "But I will spend every remaining day of my life making certain you do not regret it," he said. "That is not a promise I make lightly. I know what my promises cost." Her eyes were very bright. "That was not a question," she said. "No," he said. "Alicia Watson, will you marry me?" A pause. "That barely qualifies as a question either." "Alicia." "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes. I have been waiting for you to ask since approximately February." He laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him, low and warm. And she smiled the smile, the one that was nothing like a duchess. And he crossed the room and she stood, and he took her face in his hands the way she had taken his. "I love you," he said. "I did not plan to. It was entirely against my better judgment." "Mine too," she said. "Fortunately, neither of us has very good judgment." He kissed her. She let him. They married on a Saturday in November. Small, quiet. The village church, which was not fashionable, but was where Samuel's parents had married, and where Eliza and Thomas had been christened, and which smelled of old wood and candle wax, and the particular sacred weight of things that had lasted. Alicia wore a dress the colour of winter cream. Simple enough that people said afterward it was almost plain, which she had chosen deliberately, because she was done performing for audiences who were not worth the performance. Samuel arrived early and stood at the front of the church with the expression of a man who was not entirely certain he was awake, and when she appeared in the doorway he made a sound that was not quite a word, and his eyes went bright, and the vicar, who had known him his entire life, looked quietly delighted. They stood face to face in front of their small congregation, the land agent and his wife, the neighbour who had kept the children, the widow Pierce who had come, because Alicia had personally invited her, Eliza and Thomas scrubbed and fidgeting in the front pew with flowers that Eliza had demanded the right to throw herself. The vicar asked if anyone objected. The church went silent. Then Thomas, from the front pew, made a sound that was probably supposed to be a cough, and was clearly not. Eliza snorted. The vicar lost his composure entirely. And then everyone was laughing. Really laughing, the kind of helpless, warm, delighted laughter that fills a room from the floor up and makes the dust dance in the light. And Samuel was still holding Alicia's hands and looking at her like she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever been allowed to stand next to, and her eyes were bright and her smile was wide and completely, entirely her own. The vicar recovered. The vows were said. When the ring was on her finger and the vicar had pronounced them married and the church had erupted again, Samuel Hart took Alicia's face in his hands for the second time that morning and kissed her while his daughter threw flowers at them with considerable enthusiasm and zero accuracy. Afterward, he took her hands. His voice was unsteady. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I know that. I have always known that." She looked at him. Her thumb traced the back of his hand. "Then spend the rest of your life trying," she said. The smile that crossed his face was slow and certain and entirely private, belonging to no audience, no performance, no version of him that existed for anyone else. He had spent the better part of a year earning it. He intended to spend the rest of his life making certain she never regretted giving it. Outside the church, the November sky had cleared to that particular pale Northumberland blue that only appeared after cold rain, and the light fell across the fields and the stone walls and the muddy lane with the impartial, generous beauty of a world that continued regardless of what happened inside the small human dramas it contained. Samuel Hart walked out of that church with his wife's hand in his children running ahead through the fallen leaves, the whole ordinary, extraordinary world opening up before him. He had not deserved any of it. He would spend every remaining day trying. Some debts, after all, are not burdens. Some debts are the architecture of a life worth living.